Okay, so before we can answer that question, we need to think a little bit about what Catholics actually are. What would be the defining feature of a Catholic? What would make a Catholic a Catholic? What is the one thing that would make a Catholic different from a Protestant? What must there be? All right, there are plenty of differences between Catholics and Protestants, but what is the basic central thing that makes Catholics Catholics, different from Protestants? Any ideas? This is the basic difference. Catholics follow the Pope, the Romaho. If they don't follow the Pope, they're not Catholics. It's as simple as that. All right? And if we're talking about Christians in Western Europe, then Protestants are Christians who do not owe allegiance to the Pope. That's the basic difference between them. There are lots of other differences between what Catholics believe and Protestants believe, and just take a look at a few of them. Catholics believe in not only the Bible, but the 1,000 years or so of church tradition that came before the Reformation in the 16th century. And also for Catholics after that, further church traditions that grew up subsequently. Whereas for Protestants, basically the idea was the Bible is the source of truth for Christians. So they followed the idea of sola scriptura in Latin, the Bible as the only source of information about the religious life. And for Catholics, particularly in those days, maybe we wouldn't say it quite so much now, but in the 16th and 17th centuries, justification by works, that you could do things that would justify you to go to heaven. So the things that you did by being a good person or by doing penances so that you showed outwardly through your works, through your deeds, through what you did, that you were a good person, that this would justify you, this would make it possible for you to go to heaven. Whereas Protestants said, none of that, none of what you do on the outside matters. It's your faith inside you. It's your justification by your faith. Sola fide in Latin, faith alone. Nothing else will get you into heaven. Catholics also had the idea of free will, basically, that you were making choices that were going to affect whether you went to heaven or hell in the next life. Whereas Protestants believed the words in the Bible that say that people's names are written into the book of life at the very beginning. So they are predestined. Their fate is already decided. So predestination, especially again for 16th and 17th century Protestants, this was a big point. Catholics also had created a space in between heaven and hell, that they couldn't somehow believe that everybody would just either go to heaven or to hell, but they thought that after death there would be some place where some people would go to be purified, and then later on they would go to heaven. Whereas Protestants said there was only heaven and there was only hell. Connected with this justification by works was penance, that you could do penances. In other words, you could fast. That means you would not eat for a period of time. You could go barefoot. You could punish your body in various ways, including whipping yourself, to express sorrow for the sins that you had committed, for the bad things you'd done. Whereas Protestants said, no, none of this matters. It's how you feel in your heart. You have to repent inside your heart. It's not an outward show of something you do, like not eating or going barefoot or punishing the body in some way. It's what you feel in your heart. that is going to make a difference. Catholics would pray to Mary and to the saints, and Protestants would pray to God only. So these would be some of the differences, and there are more, such as offering prayers for the dead, which Catholics would do but Protestants wouldn't. Confessing sins is a Catholic thing. The clergy, the priests, don't marry inside Catholic tradition. Elaborate rituals, pictures, statues and things like that. Saying prayers, the same prayer again and again and again. These are basically Catholic practices, not usually part of Protestant practice. And the idea that Christ really is, his flesh and blood really is in the bread and wine that people take at communion. So these would be some of the kinds of differences. But the basic one would be whether or not they accept the Pope as their leader. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Reformation and how things developed in the 16th century as the Catholic Church was challenged and the Protestant churches started to grow up. Basically what was happening was that over hundreds of years the Catholic Church had developed quite a lot of ideas and things which were not in the Bible and were not part of the way Christianity was practiced during the first few centuries after Christ. And by the time the 16th century came along, which was the century, of course, that Shakespeare was born in, there were quite a lot of traditions that were practiced by the church but not found in the Bible. And one of the more infamous practices, one of the practices that attracted a lot of negative attention, was that of selling pardons and indulgences. And people could actually buy a piece of paper that was supposed to forgive their sins and shorten the amount of time that they would spend in purgatory before they could go to heaven after they died. But even from the time of Chaucer, quite a long time before the Reformation, there were people who could see that the main thing here was to make the church rich. It was a kind of trick which quite a lot of people did not accept. So there was quite a lot of anger because the church was so wealthy and powerful, and this anger was channeled when Martin Luther nailed his list of complaints against the church to the church door at Wittenberg in Germany. And there was a growth of popular protest against the church at this time. So Luther was the first. He had been a monk, an Augustinian monk. He had been obviously a Catholic and a doctor of theology, but he had found things that were wrong with his faith, and he presented them in this way. He didn't himself imagine that he was going to be pushed out of the Catholic Church. He thought that the church would listen to him and change itself, but things went in a different direction. He was the first, and others came afterwards, such as Melanchthon, Calvin, Zwingli. These would be some of the most famous reformers of the 16th century in Europe, and they spoke out against the Catholic Church, and they tried to establish what they felt was a more correct way of practicing the Christian religion. And so various Protestant churches were established, mostly focusing on studying the Bible and what the Bible said, and the earlier Christian writers from the first few centuries after Christ, who were felt to represent the kind of pure faith before the Catholic Church started adding on all its different ideas and developments that were not actually found in the Bible. Okay, so what was happening in England at this